Well, good afternoon. Welcome. No folks are coming in. We're going to give everyone a couple of a minute or so to get settled, and then we will start today's wonderful program. So get settled in and ready for a really lively, good conversation with our panelists today. So while folks are coming in, I'm just going to get the party started. I want to say good afternoon. I'm Natalie Bayou, Senior Director of the Economic Mobility Exchange here at Empath, and we are very excited about today's conversation as we discuss the role of economic mobility coaching in early childhood programs. As some of you already know, Empath recently released a paper entitled Moving the Whole Family Ahead, Realizing the 2-Gen Potential of Early Childhood Programs by Integrating Economic Mobility Coaching. For those of you who may not be familiar with that paper, we're going to drop a link, already done, in the chat. That'll take you directly there, and you can take some time to read it. It's a wonderful paper. The paper provides an overview of the evidence around poverty's impact on children and the benefits of promoting family economic stability. It highlights the role that early childhood programs already play in promoting family stability, and then details some specific case studies of organizations that have significantly increased their focus on parental capacity and well-being by integrating this economic mobility coaching into their already existing early childhood programs. So today's webinar is designed to continue the conversation started in that paper brief. And it's featuring 2 of the leaders from those case studies, as well as a participant who will share a bit about her experiences being coached in 2 different early childhood whole family programs. So lots of really good perspectives here. And to help have this conversation today, we are delighted to have Sarah Haight, who is the Director of 2-Gen Practice from Ascend at the Aspen Institute. She's going to be our moderator, and Sarah is the perfect guide for this conversation as she works for a national network of more than 500 leaders and organizations who are exploring, incubating, or implementing 2G approaches, which provide opportunities for and meet the needs of children and the adults in their lives together. Sarah's career has focused on economic inclusion and supporting practitioners to transcend their work with families to influence both systems and policy change. Since joining Ascend in 2011, she has managed technical assistance to the Ascend network and of practitioners, policymakers, and research focused on 2-Gen approaches. She partners across Ascend to develop and package tools and resources to equip organizations and leaders to better serve families with low incomes. Sarah, thank you so much for agreeing to join us for this conversation today. And I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our panelists and start the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie, and thanks to the whole team at Empath. I'm really thrilled to have this opportunity to facilitate this conversation. So as Natalie shared, I'm Sarah Haight. My pronouns are she, her. I work for the Aspen Institute, which contrary to my background, I am in DC. My background is our campus in Aspen, Colorado. And here in DC, I am speaking to you from the ancestral land of the Piscataway people. So Ascend, for those who may not be familiar, we're a catalyst and convener for diverse leaders working across systems and sectors to build intergenerational family prosperity and well-being by intentionally focusing on children and the adults in their lives together. We believe in the power of co-creation. We're a community of leaders, well-connected, well-prepared, well-positioned to build the political will that transforms hearts, minds, policies, and practices. And I think you're going to hear some of that in the conversation we have today. I just want to step back and note that 2-generation approaches recognize whole family units as families define themselves to consider the variety of pathways for promoting positive, pragmatic, and effective outcomes for everyone. So we work with families as experts and meaningfully engage parents and caregivers in designing policies and programs that affect them in order to develop holistic, integrated, and equity-focused solutions. And I think this conversation today is a really good example of how a family-centered lens helps to immediately identify whole families' needs and goals to inform the kind of integration that programs can use to better serve families and ensure long-term improved outcomes. So today we're specifically talking about early childhood and economic mobility and how important it is to take a holistic lens when it comes to supporting families' needs in early childhood settings. And we have three fantastic panelists. Carrie Beamer currently serves as the Family Innovation and Capacity Lead for Early Childhood Education, the Early Childhood Education Program in Washington State. She has worked with families who are furthest from opportunity in Washington State for 30 years, and she's seen firsthand how economic stability is not simply solved by the old notion of just work harder, but that the stressors of poverty, trauma, discrimination, and institutional racism can block the attainment of such skills. Carrie really approaches her work with a growth mindset, so we're lucky to have her here today. I'm also delighted to introduce Louise Marsden, who currently serves as Senior Vice President of Whole Family Early Childhood and Community Building Programs at the Opportunity Alliance, which is a community action agency in South Portland, Maine. And in that role, Louise oversees a collection of local, state, and federally funded programs that are designed to support whole families. She previously was the director of Head Start and Early Head Start in Cumberland County, Maine, and has over 35 years of experience in this field. She also provided oversight to the implementation of mobility mentoring at the Opportunity Alliance, which has been an exchange member since 2017. And then we are super lucky to have Lydia Gomez here. Lydia is the mother of 6 children. She is a current Head Start parent, and she's an active participant in Project WIN, which is part of Opportunity Alliance. She has been in the United States for 10 years and been employed as a direct support professional for 8 of those years. She also celebrated her birthday yesterday. She's also on vacation with her family right now and still made time to participate in today's webinar. So we're so lucky to have her expertise. At Lydia's request, we're actually going to start this conversation with our 2 practitioners, Louise and Carrie. Then I'll engage Lydia in a conversation, tapping her expertise about this integration of early childhood and economic mobility. And then we'll have at least 15 minutes or so for a conversation. So we would love to have you put your questions in the chat. You can put the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring that with the Empath team. If you have questions that come up as you hear folks talking, please feel free to just put your questions in the chat and we'll try and tackle them. So we're going to dive in, and Louise, I'm going to go to you first and then to Carrie, but I really want to start with who you are as people and what really brought you to this work. You've both been doing it for a long time. So what brought you to this work and what keeps you in it?
Wow, that's a really big question. So at the risk of giving away my age, my experience started actually in a Head Start program in 1965, in which I was a child attending that program. And when I look back at my early childhood years, I realize that, believe it or not, I was probably having a whole family experience, and I don't know if I really knew that. My parents went on to get their GEDs while I was moving up across school. And I remember thinking how impactful that was, that side by side with what was happening for me, the lives of my parents were changing. I also simultaneously had an obvious bumpy part as a young adult in which tragically my dad was a man who did not believe that women should go off to college. But I had this mentor in the middle school years who actually offered up something different. And my new path opened up and something else happened to me besides staying in my small local town. And I think I hit the college campus thinking how I'd had these really powerful experiences in my early childhood and also as a young adult And somehow my pathway for working with children and families became super clear. And it really never wavered from that. I went off to college and I got a degree in early childhood education, and just between now and then have just really spent the 35 years really dedicating my time and my service to young children and their families to support them to sort of being all that they can be, actually in thanks for sort of the pathway that was created for me as a young child. And really just turning around and giving it back. And happy to be here in the room with a collection of people. There are lovely folks on the screen who I know, and I'm happy to be imparting what I have learned over these 35 years as we sort of keep the work going, moving families from where they are to where they want to be. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I love that image of you in a quality early childhood program with your parents getting their GED, because I think that's so emblematic of both, you know, the origins of 2Gen as well as where the field has evolved, because we're seeing that emerging quite a bit across early Head Start and Head Start Now. Carrie, how about you? What brought you to this work and what do you think keeps you in it?
I think that it was quite by accident, actually. I after college moved to a small town in the Pacific Northwest, and I needed a job, and the local tribe said, hey, there's this family advocate job. Let's try that out. And very quickly fell in love with the work. Very quickly fell in love working with families. It was Head Start at the time. Since then, I've never not held a job in early childhood. It's a little addicting. If you see people our age that have been in the field this long, we just can't seem to get out of it. I moved around from a school district to tribes to nonprofits, all doing family advocate work, from being a direct family advocate to being a manager and supporting family service folks. And then ultimately I moved to the state. So ECAP is our early childhood education and assistance program. It's modeled after Head Start, but in Washington state, we don't have enough federal dollars to meet the needs. So the state sort of supplements with what our program ECAP to have our own version of state-funded preschool, so we can meet the needs of most of the families. We still have a ways to go.
And I think that's a really good segue actually to diving into the content of this paper and the work you all are doing. Thank you so much for just sharing a little bit of the personal impetus for entering this field. I think everyone who's on this webinar probably has their own story to share. So let's dive into, why you were interested in implementing economic mobility coaching into your early childhood programs. It could be a big undertaking. Carrie, can we start with you? What about this implementation and this integration of coaching was appealing, and what sparked your interest?
Was actually started in 2014. It was a legislative act. The legislator said, we want you to look at high quality, evidence-based programming for your classrooms and your family support. And so we sort of threw together a work group looking at different models, and ultimately economic mobility pathways was sort of met everything that we could see that we needed as a state. And so we piloted with 19 sites. We have currently about 76 contractors and a little over 450 sites throughout the state of Washington. So we did a little bit of a pilot. And when you ask about like, what did it bring? If you can imagine, at a state level, we had 76 contractors, all using some kind of goal setting model, all doing sort of using a framework of working with families. But this brought us this ability to do something we've never been able to do, which was tell the story statewide of the services provided. Because when you're using all the same tool, we have our own database and that we can measure. Where does a family come in the fall, and how do they leave services if their child is going to kindergarten in the spring? We were never able to tell the story of like the experience of a family, except for really great qualitative data, which we need, but we couldn't quantify it. And quite honestly, many times it's expensive to do comprehensive services. It's less expensive to just offer a classroom setting and not do health services and
Right.
not do family support services. So when budget cuts, when things push comes to shove, a lot of times the conversation comes up, well, we can serve a lot more kids if we just go to classroom services only.
Right.
And now with economic, with using the bridge and our goal setting tools, it really allowed the state to say, this is working in a way we could never tell that story before.
So that systematic storytelling and that data collection is key. And we'll circle back to that. Louise, I see you nodding quite a bit. So talk a little bit about what interested you in this. And as Carrie just did, can you talk a little bit about what you see as the benefits as well?
Yeah, sure. So our story is a little bit more happenstance than yours, Carrie. The Opportunity Alliance is a product of 3 mergers. And in 2011, when I arrived here, we had this very strong parenting education arm that had grown into providing ongoing coaching, largely for child welfare recipients. And the coaching piece came as a result of parents saying, thank you so much for this absolutely wonderful parenting education class. But really what would be helpful to us is if there would be this added piece, this augmentation to the parenting ed piece, which would be supporting families on how to put this into practice. And so off we go, and we develop a coaching model here at the Opportunity Alliance. And at some point, probably in the early, probably in 2016, somewhere in that neighborhood, the department shut down this program, stopped funding this program because our coaching model was not evidence-based. And that sent us into somewhat of a tailspin. And we began our sort of research and homework around evidence-based models. Simultaneously, the Head Start program was, when I took a look at what was going on in the Head Start program, the arm of the Head Start program that was the weakest, the place where it needed the greatest amount of build and support was really the family services arm. And so a small group of us began to think about how there could be something that could be cobbled together here, and what is that could be cobbled together. And it was at that time we discovered mobility mentoring. And like Carrie, I think the same thing happened for us, right? We began to look and we're like, this checks the boxes, right? It does the things we're trying to do. And we could see the use of this in more than one place, right? So probably in 2017, we decided that we were going to bring this new platform over into the Head Start and the Early Head Start program, and we began to implement it there. Like you, Carrie, there existed an already sort of like tool. There was already a matrix. There was already goal setting tools, but the mobility mentoring tools really. I think for us, the thing that we were looking very much to change was to really hone in and sharpen in our coaching part, right? Because what had happened, and this, if there are Head Start people on the call, Head Start folks will know that over the years, what has happened is that the group size of families has grown as such that when you start to think about delivering an effective coaching model, it's really difficult to do if your cohort of families is so large. And we were working very explicitly to reduce the number of families. And we knew that if we did that, if we had a strong coaching component with whatever we were putting into place, we would likely sort of begin to see changed results. And so it's at that point, really, we began to sort of like really move into, that's where we began. We began in the Head Start program. That has grown and flourished here at the Opportunity Alliance, where we are now, we have 4 established 2-gen whole family projects that are beyond the Head Start program. And again, you introduced Lydia as a mom from Project WIN, and Project WIN stands for Women in Neighborhoods. And Lydia will talk a little bit more about that as well. And Lydia has this beautiful perspective because she experienced this as a Head Start parent, and then now is experiencing mobility mentoring as a mom in Project WIN, and has been there since day one. So we've got the right person on our call. And it really just continues to grow. I anticipate there'll be a question later about what's next, and I'll save those things for that part of the conversation. But that is sort of like, again, by happenstance, but now we are deep committed mobility mentoring people, and see it as having a place in lots and lots of environments here in our community.
That's great. And I know for those who may not have joined at the top of the call, Lydia Gomez is going to, at her preference, share some of her insights in about 10-15 minutes. But I do want to connect this conversation to feedback from program participants. So you've both shared some of the biggest benefits of integrating this coaching into your early childhood programs. What's the feedback that you've heard from program participants? And based on that feedback, has there been any adaptation of the tools or the programming as a result? Carrie, let's start with you.
Sure. So as you can imagine, if the state then all of a sudden says, you stop doing what you're doing and now you're going to do this, it doesn't always go over that great. People loved what they were doing. Maybe they had created some tools that they really loved. And so it was a hurdle to get over, to get everyone trained using the model. Changing this mindset from that case management to a coaching model is a big lift for a large, we serve 15,000 families a year. So, it's a big lift to change that mindset from here's your resources to let's dig in deep and have some conversations using this tool. That was, I would think, sort of our first hurdle. And then, the nature of using the bridge is that you are having conversations about how does this affect all aspects of your life. So I need to get a better job. Okay, so instead of just increasing your wages, what is that? How does that affect your childcare subsidy? Will that affect any of your housing? How does that affect the whole sort of using those pillars of the bridge to have those deeper conversations? I think was a little bit of a pushback, because at first folks felt like, I can't ask people all this stuff. I can't ask them all this stuff. It's too personal. And now I have folks that they don't hardly even need to look at the piece of paper. They just have these conversations. They know sort of the nuances of how to get to the core issues, because as we all know, we talk about stability versus mobility, and I can just get somebody a higher paying job. But if I'm not looking at the whole family, the whole picture, and how does that higher increase in wage affect them, then it's not always the right option for that family, right? So, and that was some of our challenges, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're also speaking to is culture change, and just how connected culture change is to shifting mindsets around how we support families. And that it's not just a leadership initiative. You have to bring the whole organization or system along, and that takes time. Louise, from your perspective, at a program level, what feedback did you hear from program participants about the integration of mobility mentoring, and what pivots or adaptations did you make as a result of that feedback?
Yeah, I was trying to think if I can speak really directly about pivots that were made. What happens for me is there's certain phrases or certain things that I've heard along the way about what mobility mentoring and what coaching has meant to participants. And so I'll talk a little bit about a couple of those phrases that really resonates with me. And one of the phrases that gets used quite a bit here is people talk about coaching as the secret sauce. And I would agree with Carrie that the culture change, right, from the case management to sort of this coaching is an enormous lift, but actually one of the really cornerstones of what will make or break this particular model. And I also think you have to be willing to have the right people in the roles. And so one of the places that one of the pivots that sometimes has to get made is that you may not have the right people in the roles, right? And so, we won't be able to move the results if you don't have the right people in the role. And so you do have to make some changes. I think for us around adaptation, the place where we've spent the most amount of conversation has been around cultural adaptations. We have a very diverse population in Portland, incredibly multilingual. And again, people probably don't naturally think that that's what's happening in Portland, Maine. But in fact, the city of Portland is incredibly diverse. The current Head Start program is, at the last data point, is like 88% multilingual, right? Non-English speaking. And so we are incredibly diverse. And so our conversations around the use of the bridge have often been around this idea of cultural adaptation. And those conversations continue because I don't think anybody really has an answer, but yet they're the places where we spend the most amount of time sort of thinking and talking about that. I think one of the other things that has been reported is that, as Carrie mentioned, when you're replacing something, it means that, your program already had a handful of tools that they've been working with. And in our case, one of the things that was sort of noted is people feel like the language in the bridge is a little bit more trauma informed than some of the sort of like other matrices that we were using in some of our programs. And so that lends itself to the immediate partnering with families, right? Because the language is kind and considerate. And so when you start to talk about building this relationship, right, you're approaching that work from that lens. And so the tools sort of like afforded the beautiful foundation for the relationship work that's necessary to move to results. Yeah.
Well, I think that's an incredibly important point because of how central a racial equity lens is to this work, as well as being trauma informed. Knowing that these tools are conducive to that kind of cultural responsiveness, I think is really important for folks. So I've got two more questions, Lydia, before we go to you and then go out to the audience. So for folks listening in, please feel free to use the Q&A box to ask your questions. Carrie, we'll start with you. Was there a particular data point or outcome measure that surprised you when you started looking at this work? Because you specifically cited the power of moving from qualitative to quantitative. So would love to hear you talk a little bit about what outcomes you started seeing and anything that surprised you.
Yeah, well, if you've been using the tool, you know that the financial pillar is always the pillar that people go, oh, I don't know if I can ask them about their money, right? And so when we first rolled this out, we just, got some feedback that it's too personal. I can't ask them about their finances. They're already struggling. We know that. And in the first year, I think 45% of our goals were around finances. And so what we learned is that families wanted to talk about their finances. They wanted resources. They wanted to understand about banking systems better, and they were hungry to get those sort of resources for their family, set goals around finances. And I think when we initially were rolling this out, the feedback was, we can't do this, but actually our data told us that it was one of our highest areas, if not the highest area of goal setting, was around finances.
That's really interesting. And, you know, I think it just speaks so much to some of the opportunities around early childhood platforms. We see in our network that parents really trust early childhood providers. It's a place of connection and social capital building. So where are the opportunities to leverage that for families? And I think that financial support is really important. We see that also, interestingly, with pediatric platforms and how child well visits can be a platform for conversations around financial supports and well-being. Louise, how about you? What any specific data point or just outcomes overall that surprised you?
So I know for myself, the sort of the outcome or the data point that's been the most moving as we've looked at sort of like what has happened has really been in Lydia's project and Project WIN. And it's important to note the distinction in this project in comparison to early childhood sites, because this particular project is a project over time, right? So it's a cohort model, a project over time. And I do think that it's important to note those differences between what you realistically can accomplish in an early childhood environment, where you might have a child maybe tops 3 years if you have them from birth to 3, or if you have them from 3 to 5. While sometimes whole gen models are cohorts that are over a larger period of time. There is some distinction there in terms of data. And for me, and again, Lydia, when we met briefly last night to talk a little bit about this, and Lydia talked, I won't steal her thunder, but the data point for me that really resonated was this idea of persistence, that their families set these really sort of really big goals, right? So like in Project WIN, there are several moms who have committed to going on and getting a degree and are doing it. And we have had to spend a little time thinking about every year how we were going to measure this. How were we going to measure? Because when you're taking a look at getting a college degree, the degree may not be achieved for 4 years. And so what are you measuring in the interim, right? And so we began to look at persistence. What does persistence look like? And again, Lydia talked a little bit about who her coach Mercy is to this work. And I'm sure she'll talk about that when we turn the microphone over to her, about what that relationship has been to this work. And so we are about to have a college graduate in this cohort, in these moms. And so these are enormous accomplishments, and they are a direct product of this particular platform, right? The coaching connected with the sort of tools that really just help families sort of stay on track. And again, this idea of persistence can be used in so many other places, right? It's not just about education, right? It's sort of like what you're setting your financial goals, right? Any of along those things, and sort of continuing to develop that executive function for developing that. So been very powerful for us to watch.
Yeah, that's a super helpful reminder too about, a central tenet of this work at Empath, which is co-creation, right? And identifying how and when the outcomes are being developed in partnership with families, and persistence is such an important strengths-based frame too for families. So I have a few more questions for both of you, but I want Lydia to go to you now because hopefully there will be time toward the end for 1 or 2 final questions for the group. And I'm also mindful that we're going to start getting questions hopefully in the Q&A chat. So Lydia, and again, thank you for joining us while on vacation with your family. I would love to just hear a little bit about, having heard from Louise about Project WIN. Can you tell us about being a parent in Head Start who received this coaching?
Yes, thank you for giving me a word. So being a parent to Head Start, it's great. But even it's a half day for the kids, but it helps us, help moms to do something, you know, staying with kids in the house when for me, I do the overnight, I work at night, and it's hard when you come home, you don't have a place to leave the kids, but Head Start helps because at least if it was all day, but between like those 4 or 5 hours helps a lot. So it's helped me a lot being a Head Start parent with having as a coaching, you know, helps a lot. I have 3 kids who passed to Head Start, all of them. 2 of them, I didn't have a coaching, but the last one, I came to have a coaching. So that's improved a lot in my life. Yeah.
And working nights and having a trusted quality childcare provider, I think is essential, right? It's not possible to have that schedule. Yeah. So I think Louise shared that your coach's name is Mercy, and I'm curious if you could share a little bit about what was so helpful about Mercy. What were some of the benefits of this coaching, and what was challenging, or what did you find hard that you might be willing to share?
So having a Mercy in my life changed a lot. What changed to me? Opening my mind. You know, sometimes you have goals, but you don't know how to start your goals. You know, we have our own goals. I came to America 10 years ago. I have the ability to do everything I have on me. I don't have how to start, but having Mercy, sending me to school, prompting me, you have to go to school. You have to do that. Like I have classes, I went to online. She was helping me. Get there, you will get there, you know. English is not my first language, but she encouraged me. Like, you will get there. I know you can do that. So this is a good part for me, having a coaching, because she's there listening to me. She's there helping, you know, my family when we have some, you know, some problems, some issues, you know, she's there. So that was a part for me, like having a coaching is a good part for me as to have her.
Right. So what I'm hearing is, you know, you have an incredibly busy life as a mother. You're working nights, right? And so having someone whose job it is to support you in your goals, right? Talk to you about what your dreams and aspirations are and focus on everything you can accomplish. It sounds was really powerful. So what would you say to a parent? There may be some on this webinar who's considering participating in the coaching piece, right? They may have their children in a Head Start, but haven't participated in coaching. What do you want them to know?
Yeah, I would tell them to enjoy us. You know, it's a good program because they have you know, we have like three time monthly meeting. Like we met once. We have dinner. We have coaching. That's she have time for you to listen what you have. We talk. And then we have a meeting, just like monthly meeting, you know, talking about life, those kind of stuff, you know. But I encourage the mom to enjoy the coaching group or coaching program because it helps a lot. Like it helps. Like as a low income mom and single mom, I have a lot of benefits on on the program, like Project Win has a coaching, like when I don't have it, I'm not able to support my kids. I know if I knock the door, I have even at least a little bit what I can do to provide to my kids. You know what I mean? So I will tell them to enjoy, and then they can to enjoy the Project Win, so they cannot like it, because having someone to listen to you, that's a good thing. You know, we had a family advocate. They have a lot of kids at school. They have, but having a coaching, I think it's a different,
It is.
because she's there. She's there. Anytime you text, anytime you call her, she will respond to you. She's there helping. I think it's very different to advocating and then coaching. It's very different. Yes.
And I think, you know, that's such an important distinction, and also an important reminder that there's really important roles that both play in making these programs function well and support the different needs of families. I have a question that I'm going a little rogue because it's not what we prepared. So Lydia, tell me if you prefer not to answer, but at Ascend, we often call social capital the secret sauce of 2Gen. And Louise, you talked about a secret sauce, and I'm starting to think maybe these things should not be so secret. But Lydia, this project, when you're part of, it sounds like you're with other women as part of this group. And I'm curious if you could share how not just being coached, but being part of a group and meeting other people who are experiencing things similar to you have helped you.
Yes, having other moms in the group, you know, in a community like the community we made, like for the dinner, I think, you know, having other culture people, it's great, because it's different people in different culture, different language. But we are there when we meet once a month, they are there with us. So we communicate, we share what we are experiencing, you know, and then we are opening our mind for different culture, for different community, different language even, you know. So
Yeah.
that's, I don't know if I really answer my
No,
question very well.
That's a perfect response. And I just appreciate you answering it, because I think for folks on this webinar, something we're seeing around the country with regards to a 2Gen approach is just how important cohorts are. So groups of parents, student parents, for example, who are at community colleges being part of a coaching model, groups of parents who are part of a coaching model at Head Starts, that we're seeing real evidence that that parents can connect with each other, hold each other accountable, and share resources in a way they might not otherwise be able to, going it solo. So just appreciate that, Lydia. And one last question for you before I invite others in the webinar to put their questions in the Q&A. I know we have one we'll get to. Can you share what's next for you? And, you know, it sounds like Mercy has been incredibly helpful in identifying some of your goals and aspirations. Would you mind sharing, you know, some of what that looks like for you and what you see next for you?
So I am a businesswoman. I am a catering. I cooked even, I am the one providing food monthly, every month to the program. I cook for them. So that is my goal. So I like to cook. I like to do things, but being with Mercy, I worked hard so to have my license, kitchen license for catering. So this is the thing I am doing to be, to have my own business.
Yeah.
So I am doing that classes. I already did the class online. So I know I failed for the exam because the exam was on Monday, but I failed. I have a second chance to get it. She was there prompting me to get it. That's the important thing. I am working with Mercy. But I am working with Mercy so I can at least have that license of kitchen. So
That is awesome. There's some hand clapping in the chat. So for Mainers who are on the webinar, you heard it here first, that there's a catering business in your vicinity. And, you know, I think that what you're speaking to, Lydia, really aligns with a lot of the research around 2Gen. So we know that when parents increase their earnings, when they're parenting, there's a direct relationship to the lifetime earnings of their child, right? So you're sharing with us such a wonderful example of the intergenerational effects of you increasing your workforce training, starting a business, increasing your income, and the potential effects for your children. So thank you for sharing that. I'd love to go to the Q&A with folks on the webinar. We have one that came in via Q&A and then one that came in via direct message to me. So the first one is from Sabri, and this is a question for Louise and Carrie. Are the bridge conversations with the head of household only, or are all parents, adults in the family part of this? Could you both actually speak to, and I'll start with you, Carrie, how different family members are engaged in this process?
Yeah, everyone wants me to give a straight answer, and I would just say that depends. It really depends. It depends on the family. It depends. Some folks want to do it together. Some dad's working during the day and mom's available, so those conversations are generally held with the mom. If it's a single dad, sometimes they invite grandma. It's really open to who wants to come to the table. And so we don't really set a parameter, like it needs to be done with these people. It's sort of setting the table, and whoever comes to dinner is welcome.
Louise, you're nodding. It sounds like
I was like, oh, can I just write ditto? So, you know, I love the setting the table and who comes, right? I mean, I think the reality is that, you know, families are individual, and the reality is our job is to sort of like show up and accommodate what's happening individually for families. And so when you set a parameter, you set it up so you cannot do that. And so every family will need something slightly different. And the gift is that the tools really allow you to build your program to accommodate that. Just really nice. Yeah.
That's really helpful. And I think it bears noting here that even at Ascend, we recognize that the 2-generation term is imperfect, right? So families define themselves, and in a lot of communities, especially Indigenous communities and communities of color, a 2-generation approach is not effective. You need a real multi or even 7-generational approach. We work with folks in Hawaii, and they use the term ohana nui, which really looks across multiple generations. So I do want to just acknowledge that we adapt this terminology for context, and the North Star, as my boss Ann Mosley always says, is better outcomes for families, not just more 2Gen. So I want to go to a question in the chat from Deborah Stolbach. She said, you talked about the importance of having the right person in the role. Can you elaborate on what qualities you look for when hiring for this role? Carrie, I'll go to you. You look excited about this question. So I'll go to you first, and then I'll go to Louise.
Yeah, I'm glad Louise brought that up, because it's an important thing when you're lifting up a coaching model, because you have to have a growth mindset and that framework that is really willing to bend and grow and change. And so I think for us, we saw right away where people were like, this is not for me. This was not what I was designed to do. I get people library cards and I know this. And so it just was out of their comfort zone. And I think we probably did have some folks that left their positions because it just didn't sort of resonate in their body. But again, I think it comes down to that growth mindset and seeing families in that 2Gen approach, right? That we're looking holistically, and not only just the whole family, but how does all of these systems interact with each other. I don't know, Louise, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, that is such it. I mean, in the end, it's such a key and important question and consideration here. And I agree. I think you do have folks who do sort of say, no, thank you. The case management model is really prescribed and really clear, and it's really direct, and it's hard to fudge up, right? When you're saying to a family, here's your referral.
Right.
I think it's I think people who come to this work who do not believe they're the experts, who actually know they're not the experts, right? They arrive in this work believing they have something to learn in all the experiences they're going to have with their families, and that they don't have the answers. They actually come to the work knowing that families have the answers, and their job is to be in relationship with families to sort of grow that, right? I think you have to be super curious. You have to do a lot of wondering. You just show up and you're curious and you're wondering, and right? I have this colleague who talks about the work is about walking side by side with somebody, right? It's about just walking side by side. When I hear Lydia talk about her relationship with Mercy, that's what she's describing, right? Mercy is just side by side with her. We know that, I raised 4 girls in partnership with a lot of people, and we are not meant to do this work alone. We are meant to do this work in relationship with others. And for many of our families, the safety net, right, the social capital in their lives is really small. And so coaching provides a link to that, right? They become initially that person. And of course, the job is, of course, to connect families inside their own communities. But I mean, we have worked really hard at our interview questions. That's one of the things we spend a lot of time thinking about, what are the right interview questions so you can really get to know who's sitting across the table from you. And you can stage questions that will force the kinds of conversations that are really telling about who that person is on the other side and what they value, right? And so, but it is, one of the other phrases that's used often here, and we hear this often, is about how results move at the speed of trust and relationships. And that is it's so front and center, right? And if you know that, then having the right people is a key component to sort of moving the needle on anything you're trying to address. Yeah.
So I know we have about 6 minutes left before we wrap up, but Lydia, I want to go to you on this question because you found the right person, it sounds like. Tell us what makes Mercy so special.
So, working with Mercy, it's special because she's opening people's mind. She's pushing people to improve what they have. It's not easy to fund, to sometimes we know, you have that on you, you have it, it's your goal, you want to do it. But sometimes we need someone to push you, to advise you, so
Right.
Mercy, yes, Mercy is there pushing us. It's a lot of mom, as Louise said, they cannot be finishing college. It's, if she wasn't there, we couldn't, but she's there pushing, helping. It's special for us. Like this summer, I can talk about summer time. The kids are home. It's busy. We are busy. But she's there pushing us, apply for, you go online, do this for the kids to go to camp. It's special for us, being with kids, I have like 5 kids here because my oldest one is 20 years old. I have 5 kids. Being with them during summer time, like no school, it's not easy. But
Yeah.
she's there. She's there like, hey, the kids have to go out, the kids have to do this. So it's special.
Thank
It
you for
is.
sharing that. And, I think for empath thinking too about sort of the codification of some of the, both a skill fit and sort of qualities or ways of working that might help people understand how to hire for this is probably really helpful. And there may be tools on that. I think we have time just for one more question. I see Carrie is responding to one of the other questions in the chat. I want to get to Michelle's question on who are the right families or the families that may be most benefiting from this particular model, recognizing that there's probably a fairly wide continuum. And I think it might be helpful, Louise and Carrie, to close out on insights or lessons from your work so far on how recruiting, retention, or outreach to families, what's most effective for families who want to be engaged successfully in these types of programs. Louise, could we start with you and then go to Carrie?
Yeah, sure. That's actually such a meaningful conversation going on for us here. This idea of readiness. We've had a lot of lessons about this work in terms of that, and so our work is not complete there. We're really literally sort of like continuing to talk about, should you have a readiness component to this? And I think for us, one of the things that we have to take into consideration is sort of like, as I'm sure we all know and people on the screen understand, is that much of this work, you have a funder, right? You have somebody's funding the work and somebody has expected deliverables. And so it's important to pay attention to what your expected deliverables are. And that sometimes can help you understand what your readiness buckets may look like. I'm remembering early on when we started to talk about this conversation, and we had some consultation from a local foundation here who was like, you need to know, right? Like, is this model for the unhoused? Is this model for somebody who is chronically mentally ill and is currently not in care? And, like that left us with these really interesting questions to sort of like wonder about. And again, I think what has happened for us is that I think this work can be used in almost all catchments, but you need to fully understand what your expected deliverables are of your funder in order to make good choices about who comes into at what place in your continuum, right? Because it is completely an appropriate tool to use with the unhoused. But if your deliverables are that you have to be able to demonstrate that you've gotten X amount of families or X amount of parents to, these career events or X amount of this, and you're working with the unhoused, the leap there doesn't make sense, right? So a real sense of clarity about what your expected deliverables are, and then be thinking about what the appropriate readiness components might be for what that cohort is. Does that make sense? Like,
that makes sense.
It's a really tricky piece a bit.
And I know we have to wrap in 1 minute. So Carrie, just want to give you a chance to quickly answer on the readiness piece, given your purview at the state level.
Well, we did some initial data collection on family characteristics, demographics, cultural backgrounds, and we didn't find any differences that really stood out to us.
Okay.
That it was pretty even across the board, whether it was working with a dad or a mom, whether it was a African-American family or a white family, the outcomes were pretty similar across our state. So, of course, it's families. And so if you're working with a family who's unhoused, then it's going to be different, right? You're going to adapt the tool to work with that family in an appropriate way. I think the big takeaway is that in preschool, we love to like go with the flow and adapt our classrooms and think about emergent learning. And that's where I think this tool fits so nicely. Is it's a model, but it isn't so prescriptive that you can't just take it and go with it with a family.
Thank you. And so we'll leave you with that image of adaptability. And I just want to say thank you to Louise, Carrie, and Lydia for taking your time this afternoon, and to all of you for joining us for this conversation. I am going to turn it over now to Natalie to close us out.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Carrie, Louise, and Lydia. That was a wonderful conversation. And I think that all of your authentic responses are going to help people who are interested on the screen and learning more. So thank you all. Thank you. And we are going to, if you are interested in learning more about Empath's work and the exchange, there we go. There's a link for you. And I know we didn't get to all the questions. There, you know, if folks want to, if folks have questions for Empath, I know some of them were specifically for the participants, but we're also happy to answer those as well. And just really appreciate everybody's time and interest in this really important topic. So thank you all and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lydia. Happy birthday.
Thanks.